Chapter 20. Jessica stared at the mirror, looking over her dress for the 100th time. Her long auburn hair flowed gently over her square shoulders, and she was glad to see that the woman in the mirror looked a lot calmer than she felt. Jessica had dressed in a room at the front of the mansion, and she had felt strange changing clothing in a bedroom that was not hers. She walked over to the window and looked down over her hometown, newly covered in a blanket of snow. She watched silently through the glass as the last rays of the sun died behind the hill that loomed over the sleepy city. The last week has been hellish. Following that disastrous conversation on the staircase, her relationship with David had been strained at best, and nearly every conversation between the two of them had ended up in an argument. She sighed and watched as the lights started to appear in the town below. What she said was completely true. Try as she might, she couldn't find a way past the simple fact that David had been his sister's lover, and that he had spent the last 10 years of his life preparing to do all of this to show his love for Susan. How could she know what was in his heart? He told her that he loved her, but there always seems to be a but. That's the problem. She wanted a forever love with no ifs, ands or buts. Perhaps it was completely her fault, she mused. Perhaps David was completely over Susan, and it was simply Jessica's own fear of being hurt that was keeping her from making a commitment. Whatever it was, she knew that she just couldn't set the past aside. Most of the work of the last week had been under her direction, not David's. All of the major construction was done, and the furniture and decorations started arriving. She had not realized how much different a room looks with furnishing than without it. She fussed over flower arrangements, trimmings and knickknacks, changing her mind 1,000 different times. To his credit, she thought, David let her make all of the final decisions on the house dressing, helping her install things when she asked. Jessica turned at the soft rapping on the door, knowing it had to be David. "I am decent, come on in," she called out. He walked in the doorway, and saw her standing in the window. He let out an involuntary gasp, as his heart skipped a beat. "You are a lot more than decent, Jess. You are absolutely stunning." Jessica blushed and was instantly furious at herself for doing so. He walked in and sat down on the bed. "It's going to get really hectic here in just a bit, and I wanted to talk with you for a bit, if you don't mind." "What's on your mind?" she asked. She regretted her tone as soon as she heard it, but David showed no emotion at her sharp words. "I wanted to thank you for all of your help," he said, "and I wanted to tell you a couple of things." Jessica walked over to the window and stared out at River Tun, not saying a word. "I wanted to tell you something we both already know. I could never have done this without you. Oh, I might well have gotten the house done, but it wouldn't have looked 1/10 as good as it does now. You really threw your heart into the project, and it shows. You have real talent, Jess. The way that you mix the furnishings and decorations is absolute art. I kept thinking that you were doing it all wrong, but I held my tongue, and when you were done with the room I realized that it was exactly right. Each one is different, but they all have a common theme. They flow one into the next. It's absolutely amazing. When you get some time, you should look at the book and look at what you have done. It's the same feel, but it's totally different. The original owners needed you as their decorator." "Thank you," she said quietly, her gaze not straying from the window. "I can't tell you the amount of respect I have gained for you since I have met you," he continued. "You never had a chance, did you? Before you were an adult you were a parent, and you had to make your way in the world all alone doing the best you could do. I would have cracked under all that pressure, most everybody would have, but you held it all together. You gave Philip a great home. Rather than sitting around and crying about how you were a victim of circumstances, you stood up and did what had to be done. Despite everything, you not only survived, but you have become an incredible woman in the process. I will always treasure the time that we have had together, even if it hasn't worked out like I would have hoped," he said. "If you ever need me, or need anything, I am one phone call away. I love you, Jess." He got up and headed towards the door. Stopping in the doorway without turning, he paused. After hesitating for a minute, he said softly, "I am leaving after this is over tonight. I am going to leave my set of keys in the desk in my room. I would consider it a favor if you would keep them until the paperwork transferring the house to the Historical Society." "Well, that's it, I will see you downstairs. The guests will be arriving in about an hour, and our helpers will be here sooner than that. Jessica listened as his footsteps echoed down the hallway, and tried to come to grips with the emotions racing through her chest. A feeling of acute pain washed through her, accompanied by something that felt a lot like panic. He's just going to leave, just like that, she said out loud to nobody. Of course he's going to leave, stupid. He has absolutely no reason to stay here. She tried to convince herself that he would be better off going home to the city, where he was obviously more comfortable than in this small town. But try as she might, she felt like a hole had been ripped in her heart. She was surprised to hear the doorbell chime moments later, having not seen anybody drive up the front driveway. Of course, she thought, it's been snowing. David will have shut the front gates, since nobody in a two-wheel drive car could make it up that hill when it is slick. They must be using the back road. She walked downstairs and saw Gwen Simon and 2 other members of the B. Ridge Social Club, who were going to help serve refreshments. The women were standing just inside the doorway, looking around the house with shocked expressions on their faces. My goodness, Gwen said, this is unbelievable. This place looks like a museum. I don't believe it. Hello, Gwen, Jessica said with a surface-deep smile. Thanks for helping us out tonight. You know we always help a hostess on the tour every year, she said matter-of-factly. Truth be told, I wanted to come here to see what this young man had done with the place. I had no earthly idea it could look like this. It looks brand new. Absolutely amazing. I am glad you like it, David said politely. Can I take your wraps? He took the coats to the other room, and Jessica showed the women to the kitchen. What might normally have been a 20-second walk through 2 rooms turned into a 10-minute inspection tour, as the 3 women pored over each room. Simply amazing, Gwen kept saying. They entered the kitchen, an area that stood in stark contrast to the rest of the house. The women, all of whom were grandmothers several times over, had spent many hours in a kitchen, and they were very surprised with what they found in this one. Is he going to open up a restaurant or something? Gwen asked, examining the commercial-grade stove, oven and grill. No, he just wanted to have the ability to entertain a large number of guests, Jessica said casually, trying to keep the emotion out of her voice. Another ring at the door had Jessica excusing herself, and she reached the front in time to see somebody, a woman she didn't know, exchanging a hug with David. A man that Jessica also didn't know followed the woman, and she watched with interest as David shook his hand and took their wraps. The man had short-cropped blonde hair, and the woman was a petite redhead. Both looked to be around David's age, and it was obvious that they were a couple. She walked over to greet them, and the man smiled when he caught her gaze. You must be Jessica, he said, extending a hand. I am Adam, and this is my wife Brenda. Hello and welcome to Riverview House. You are friends of David's. Old friends, Brenda said with a smile. She was not very successful at hiding the fact that she was giving Jessica the once-over. Alan's the man who prepared that little present for Kevin. David said, not only is he my best friend, he's also my lawyer. Jessica smiled. It's a shame that I didn't videotape his reaction to your documents, she said. He was less than happy. The man is a disgrace, and should be disbarred. Alan snapped. I did some research into some of his cases, and after this all works out, I plan to pursue just that. Don't tell anybody, but we are now interviewing some of his old clients. There's more to Mr. DeWitt than meets the eye. I hope you skin him alive, Jessica said honestly. Shall I show you around the house? She asked, and led them off on a tour. The Tour of Lights is an annual event in Riverton, a holiday event that dates back to the 1840s. In the original days of the event, it had been the only time when the common people of the county were invited to visit and be the guests of the upper class. Jessica had researched the event in the Sentinel's archives. The earliest story she had found, dating back to the first year that the paper was published, 1853, talked about Riverview House in particular. It stands there, shining out in the night sky like a beacon of light. Walking through those marbled hallways and exotic furnishings must be much like what it feels like to walk through the pearly gates of heaven, the article had proposed. The tradition has continued every year, and several years ago, it was noted in an official state tourism publication, as being the oldest continuous holiday celebration west of the Mississippi. Although other towns had their own events, the Riverton Tour of Lights was recognized by everyone in the area as being the biggest of them all. This year there were 15 host homes. All but Riverview House were used as daily family residences or business offices. Most of the houses were located on College Street, at the foot of the hill below Riverview House. 2 were located on backside of the hill on the south side of Riverview House, and Jessica and David expected that most of the crowds would start in the College Street area and work their way up the hill. The doors of the houses are open to the public at 7 p.m., when the church bells of the town are rung. Jessica stared out the side window into a parking area that was quickly becoming full of cars. "I don't think they are going to wait and visit us last," she told David, who came up and looked over her shoulder. "I guess they were curious to get a look at the place, too." The 2 of them bustled around the house, straightening cushions that were not crooked, and they checked for non-existent dust. By tradition, people removed their shoes and left them in a prepared area, so as not to track snow and mud onto freshly cleaned carpets, and David was beginning to wonder if he had set out enough room for the shoes. In the distance, the church bells started ringing. David and Jessica walked over to the door, and both breathed in deeply. She turned to face him, and quickly reached out and squeezed his arm. "Thank you for doing this," she said. "Thank you on behalf of Susan."